Well, we can start by talking about the science behind diversity. Anybody want to start by sharing something that they wrote down?
So maybe why don't we take a look at one of our questions? Which question should we start with, Kinara?
We can start with, how can we benefit from learning and knowing about diversity?
All right.
How can we benefit from it?
Oh,
Just share.
I'm just raising my hand. I think we can learn and benefit by knowing people's backgrounds, people from other side of the world. We can know why their skin color is different, why their facial I don't know how you would say, but features, are different than others, and not to discriminate against them because we know that it's not ugly, it's just how they are.
I completely agree with you, and I think it helps us better understand the different races and the different cultures that comes with diversity. And I think it might help us better understand of putting yourself in other people's shoes and seeing where they're coming from, and because you might be thinking something totally different than that person.
I want to agree with Malia and Mia because I do feel that it's important to understand the way another person thinks, because if we don't, then we can sometimes be very offensive to somebody without knowing, and we can learn new things about different people, and they can learn new things about us, and I think that it's it could be a very good bonding experience to have diversity and be able to talk and be in a diverse community.
I agree with Mia, Malia, and Jonah, and it's kind of all coming to also stereotypes, mostly because we think these, for example, a skin color, we might think something about them, or where ethnicity, we might think that. So it's just when we learn more about it, it just shows us what we know.
We learn about where these differences come from, and maybe find out that maybe we're not so, different after all. And why do we have these different features? Why do species, not even just humans, why do they have these different features within their own species?
They have the different features and stuff, and so do we, because of our environment and kind of the terrain area. We have people who live in colder environments tend to be shorter, and they also have their noses are a bit kind of pointier, because I can't remember exactly why, but I've seen it in some kind of article, and it had something to do with the environment and kind of the weather.
I kind of disagree with that, because I feel like I don't think an environment can affect the phenotypes of humans. I think it comes from their parents and genes. Because if my parents have pointy noses or something, and then we move to the north and then they have me, that is the north is not affected.
So that's an interesting point. So why don't we discuss how maybe the time related to natural selection to discuss this point here?
Do we think this is because of their ancestors, or because if you go back, obviously they were from somewhere, so
Christina's saying where they originally came from, not after birth, how they.
Yeah.
It's because she's saying the first few people they adapted to their surroundings.
They still have parents. They don't
And
just
then
pop out of
yes,
nowhere.
we know. But if and then their genes.
Don't speak over each other.
Then the genes start.
Well,
That's what I'm saying.
I think Christina was sort of saying species other than humans.
Mm-hmm.
So when we said earlier how birds, they adapt with their beaks, some have curved for specific types of animals, worms they eat, or fruits or other things. So that's what I think kind of Christina was trying to say.
So even the food availability can cause organisms to have different phenotypes.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
A question that I think we have, what is diversity in general?
Diversity is when, because if you break up the word diverse, it's kind of like when you're separated. It's like not separated. It's kind of when you have differences because it's diverse. I mean, it's like different. So I think that diversity is when you have a combination of different things. So different colors. You can have a diverse color set. You can have a diverse bunch of opinions. So I think that diversity is differences.
But I have a question. My question is, why do people have to be cruel of asking questions about their skin color, how different they are?
I feel like it's important to
Like, why do people have to be cruel about how people look, how different they are, their religions?
Honestly, I'm gonna say, I feel like people discriminate against different like skin tones and facial expressions and like or features. Why did I do that? Facial features because maybe they're insecure about themselves.
But we all have the same cell. We're all mammals.
But they don't think about that.
Yeah, and they might be jealous of you, and they just might want to be you.
I agree with Malia.
We're all
and
different.
I think that people find others, and instead of saying like their first reaction to it might be different because they might not have known like that like they're human too because they've never really seen somebody who has a different skin tone than them, and so they could have thought really differently and they could have thought negatively, which they were taught their children. And so now it's come down to this where we can finally sit in the classroom with different types of skin colors instead of one kind of.
And I agree with Nia, and I feel like when it comes to kind of like people like discriminating against just like other people who just because they look different, sometimes that can come from home, like if they see their parents doing it, then that can just kind of go down the line. And then also I feel like some people may just be like shocked that you don't look like them, and they may be in an environment where like usually everyone looks like them, and then when they're exposed to a new type of people, then they're like shocked, and so they just say what first comes to mind.
I also agree with Nia and Malia because they may also not have known the history of how they got the features.
So, like, knowing about why different variances or different, characteristics of species exist, how could we maybe use that to inform people, about certain social structures that we have in place? If we understand where our differences come from.
Yeah, so I think that it comes that to answer the first question before the one you just asked, Ms. Raskin, I think that it is just ignorance, to be honest. And I think that it might be important, and when I think of ignorance, I don't think of not knowing. I think of ignoring the knowledge.
Ooh.
Interesting.
I was doing
And so that's what ignorance is. It's ignoring the knowledge. And so I think that it's important to possibly have the knowledge to think about somebody else's shoes, empathy, sympathy, because if we don't, then what's the point of having a diverse community? We might as well go back to the times of segregation.
Yes.
I want to change the topic to do species need diversity to live. I feel like they do need diversity to live because, like I said, the birds have to adapt to different weather, like the climate, or like where they are. And it's also going down like to predators and prey, like what they have to do to survive with their predators and prey. So I just think that's also like why they should need diversity.
And while we're talking about the environment, especially, in this day and age with lots of, new technology and new, transportation ways to get around, there's pollution in our environment, there's changes to our planet. So how does that, why do we still need natural selection with a changing planet? Like, how does that come into play?
When you're thinking,
I
Don't
think
find it.
that like with the animals, and even humans, where back when we were just forget the word for it, the creature that looked like us but an egg mixed together.
Oh, okay.
I feel like that was probably one of the first ways that that's probably the first, how do you say, like, replica of us or something. and that we look like that, and then now we look at us, and we're all different colors, we're all different sizes and shapes and everything. I think that we're all still the same, we're just different in like features. Same with animals, like the polar bear, and like it's changing because it's like white. It was, I think, originally brown, so it had to change because it lives in the cold climate, so that way it's like not visible to prey or predators.
Alright, diversity is important to live because it's the same thing like when Miss Rossi was talking to us about how humans had evolved due to the harmful sun UV rays. So I think that development or evolution, as Charles Darwin said, is important because if animals, humans, and anything living don't learn how to adapt to their surroundings, then they could easily be killed off.
So I feel like diversity comes into place like earlier said about the environment. So it's kind of because they need to have certain features to survive, like survival of the fittest. Kind of like with the theory, like Darwin's theory with the finches and such. Kind of like Annie and I did a project on the mountain goats and such like that. So they had to evolve to have like certain types of horns to defend like their young and such, and they also had to have thinner and more oily hairs, not thinner, thicker and more oily hair, just so that way if they accidentally like fall into like let's say like a pond of water or like their water source, like it'll easily come off, so that way they won't freeze to death. So they kind of need it like depending on their environment.
So speaking of these differences and how they help us survive, so what do you think would happen without diversity, or what would our Earth look like without it?
I feel like
You can.
well, I feel like our world would, I feel like we could still probably tell each other apart, of course, like by clothes and everything. But I feel like we would need diversity to learn that everyone's like equal, but we're still equal no matter what in this world, because we're always going to be family, like at the end of the day. So I feel like we do need diversity, even if there wasn't. I feel like there still would be in some way.
Without diversity, I think everyone would be a lot more critical. Like if you look slightly different, like you'd probably get picked on and stuff because everyone's like, oh.
Like if everyone looked exactly the same, but there was like someone who was just slightly different.
It'll be
Yeah.
That would be almost impossible to do. Like have, not impossible to like physically do, to have all of us like number 1, number 2, number 3, because you couldn't. Theoretically, you can't really keep up with the names, because if we're all the same, like we have twins, like we have Christina and Lauren, but they look different. If we have twins that are like actually exactly the same and more like our whole world is made up of everybody is one person basically.
Yeah.
How is that gonna work? Like you're not gonna remember the name.
Do we think that like with all this information, do we think that like humans are still evolving? Like if we all don't look like each other, so do we still think that they're evolving and all that?
Yeah. Because
Why do you think so, Alexis?
so like we're back to the other question. If we didn't have diversity, there would have been more. It would have been if we didn't have those people to fight against segregation, we would still been here. The white people would still been in the better schools, and the African Americans would have been in a different school, but they wouldn't have been learning as much. But if we had diversity, we would have all been here. We would have accepted our differences. We would have been learning. We've been learning the same thing. We will all have chances to survive.
I agree, and I think that we might still be evolving, because I feel like now that we have fully accepted not really fully, but we have accepted other cultures and different types of skin colors, I feel like now that we're mixing, that since there are laws, that we can now be with whoever we want to be with, so it's no longer that whites have to be with whites and blacks have to be with blacks. So then people can look differently, and people are coming out looking different, like mixed kids, and how we're kind of evolving. And I feel like technology is kind of holding us back, because I feel like technology is evolving for us. And so the stuff that we would need to do on our own, it's technology is doing it for us.
I want to I agree with you, and I also just want to choose a topic on something I wanted to talk about, which I think is a really important thing in society right now. Like, how does racism, sexism, or ableism affect our community? Because I know it affects us because we of course we're discriminating against everyone. Women don't get paid more than men get paid more than women, and if you're a person of color and you're a woman, you get paid less than a white woman. Because so if I got paid 70 cents, a person of color would probably get paid 60 cents. And ableism, a lot of people for example, people take handicap spots when they're not supposed to, and people don't understand that it's actually it's for someone that actually needs it, and it affects them because they can't walk, or they can't get to the store or place they need to when they have to. So I agree with Lena, and I'd also like to add on. So for the sexism part, a lot of people do it because of what's happened in the past, and usually in the past girls would only have certain jobs they could do. A while ago they only had I think 6 options, like nurses and teachers and secretaries and such. So some people are kind of still stuck back in that time. But there's a lot of people that think that even though we're girls, we can't do as much. We can't play as many sports. We can't. We basically just can't do much.
I agree with you, Christina, and I feel like racism and sexism really affects us, because racism is because people are now looking at it because sometimes when I tell my parents things that happen, they'll ask me what kind of race they are, because we know that because of racism, black people, they're saying that blacks do this and whites would usually be the nice kids, and that it's really, really affecting us, because it's raising us to have these stereotypes and to think about these stereotypes and to follow them, and to think that, oh, this person is going to do this and I'm going to blaming them for doing this, and it's an effect.
This can kind of
Go ahead, Canary.
this can kind of go into the next question. How can we understand how our behavior affects others?
Bullying, because they can go to a personal level because of their race or how they look.
And you said something earlier, at the end of it all, we are all made from cells. We're all mammals. So does it make sense to bully people for their different phenotypes?
No, because we have these different skin colors because of the sun to protect, because it's adapted by sun exposure, which is when there's a time period of sun affecting you. So it's darker because it's protecting you from the sun. For you don't get sunburns easier.
It kind of ties into this one, with our ancestry. If our ancestry were from countries that were, had more sun exposure, that is why maybe we see darker skin tones. So it doesn't really make sense to bully someone if their phenotype is for a survival tactic, right?
And I think this would sort of go with the racism, sexism, or ableism, but LGBTQ is mostly part of it because Donald Trump made it illegal for people to fire people that were gay or lesbian, because one of their workers would have a worker announce that he was gay, and the boss fired him because of that. And so I feel it's because that's discriminating, or just as that affects us, because they feel insecure about oh, I like girls, or I like boys kind of thing. So I think that also affects us, because I feel that also affects kids, how they say, oh, you shouldn't like that because girls like boys and boys like girls.
I agree about that because they might feel very insecure about it. And so when they build up that courage and tell somebody and then they get fired, that would really hurt somebody. And so I see why like he made that law, and I feel like it's also it goes under how does racism or sexism and that kind of stuff, because it's been like people again it goes back to stereotypes and how people think, oh, people are gonna do this, and so I feel like it really does come back to stereotypes.
Let's take a look at one last question. Will natural selection ever stop? You know, we see so many differences in our species and how they've changed over time. Do you think this process of, you know, adapting to meet the needs of our environment, do you think that will ever stop?
Okay, so then so to answer your question, let's ask another question. Is the world going to stop changing?
Okay.
Is the world going to stop changing?
I think no, it's never gonna stop changing. I mean, we're turning, we're moving. Everyone, there's new days happening, new years, new months, everything. There's these little things that are happening, like even new clothes are being brought out. Everyone's changing. They're changing. Their appearance is changing. They're growing. Like one day I could have my hair down to here, and then I could just cut it to here. That's changing. The whole world is changing as like you know it, and that ties into like the racism and the sexism and everything, and being gay and being lesbian. Like these people are, if you're discriminating against somebody because of their skin color or how they believe, then you're just as bad as that one person who's mean to you. So.
Okay, so I found this thing on BBC News that I feel ties into what we've been talking about, and it says, there is no question that humans are unique in the animal world. We have developed technologies that shelter us from the harshness of the environment in a way that no other creatures have managed. While polar bears evolved thick coats of blubber to insulate them from the Arctic cold, humans could skin the polar bear and use the pelt as like their outer layer as clothing to keep them warm.
Going back to Jonah's question, so we're gonna also go back to technology. So the world is changing because technology is like improving every minute, every day, and like we watch movies like it's kind of like we might have flying cars one day, or like well we already have it that cars that can drive, which is really crazy, or like more because we have like robots. We have a robot dog now, and like we actually like have robots to help us out and like.
Yeah, like how is that gonna, like I know Malia brought up a picture, you know, that I showed y'all of an organism from millions of years ago. You know, it might be interesting. What if one day future generations see pictures of us and are like, wow, I can't believe, you know, like what is that? You know, it might, yeah. So it's just something to think about. Jocelyn, I know you had a point you wanted to make.
I also think as the world changes, we changes, because that's what she said. And the animal she was researching back then, it would have no horns, and now it has horns.
Yeah. Kobe wanted to share something as well.
I also think that about the question you asked, will humans ever stop evolving? I asked that question. I think that humans will not stop evolving because we're in a world that's like constantly changing, and to survive, we'll have to like evolve into much better.
To what our future environment holds, we'll have to adapt to meet those needs.
To survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, the superbug, yeah, right?
So the world is going to stop. The world is never going to stop changing. And so to really answer your question, Miss Rossi, no, human evolution isn't going to stop until there's no need for it. In fact,
I don't know that there ever won't be.
Maybe there never won't be.
Evolution is not going to stop until it's not needed, and that's never going to happen. So to answer your question, no, evolution isn't going to stop.
There's always going to be a problem.
Exactly.
Always adapt to that problem.
Adapt to whatever.
All right, so give yourselves a nice round of applause. Great seminar. Yay.